coming. They did not tell me I had to talk into a microphone today, so bear with me. I'm trying to get used to it. My name is Jen Miller. I run the Farmer Services Program at NOFA, Vermont. Before taking that position, I was a diversified vegetable farmer for 7 years, dabbling in small livestock and broiler chickens. I'll tell you a little bit while I'm here from the lean perspective. Clearly, I'm not Ben Hartman, but I've been working with farms over the past couple of years on implementing lean production systems on their farms and doing a bunch of other like manufacturing style trainings on lean to try to get that in my head because it's super appealing, and I wish I had that skill set when I was a beginning farmer. So before we really dive in, we just want to get a sense of who is in the room. So who is actively farming right now? Sweet, awesome, most of you guys. And do we have vegetable farmers? Primarily, excellent. What about other, you got small livestock, etc.? Yeah, what did you say? Soon, awesome, cool. And what about years in business? Who's 0 to 3? Nice. And 3 to 7? And 7 to 10? 10 plus. Okay, awesome. And who's read the lean farm? Okay, so not a whole lot. We got like a quarter-ish of the room. So the intention for today is to, from my perspective with all the exposure to lean and what I've seen be most effective on Vermont farms, do kind of like a really basic baseline introduction to lean to get kind of a little thinking going. We'll take a few minutes, we'll do a 5-minute activity partway through and then another 5-minute little activity a little ways on just to get you guys starting to practice thinking in this manner. So why lean and how did this all start? So talking to farmers, the book came out, started talking to farmers in Rutland County primarily, right across the border from here. Commonalities, like why this book was appealing, there's a limited land base. Land prices are skyrocketing everywhere. The increasingly competitive markets, especially where it's not super high density for a population, so you have limited access to markets unless you're choosing to go out of state or drive long distances for distribution. A lot of them were starting families, looking at their current systems and just saying, like, if we keep going at this pace, we're not going to be sustainable. Like, we're not going to be in business in 5 years because we're just going to burn out. So really appealing to the idea of lean, which is focusing on reducing expenses and not spending any more money to do that. So you're improving your profit margins with your current resource base. Oops, clicker. So right here, this is kind of like the manufacturing folks' definition of lean. So a systematic approach to identifying and eliminating waste through continuous improvement by flowing the product at the pull of the customer in pursuit of perfection. There's a lot going on in that definition, right? So the goal today is to try to get a baseline understanding of these keywords. So eliminating waste, continuous improvement, this thing is pretty awesome, product flow, and customer pull. And we also just want to be clear from the start, like, you're making up your own definition of perfection, right? Like, you're not going to, okay, let's just lay it out there. Your farms are not going to look like Ben Hartman's farms if you start doing this next week by the end of next season. But doing some holistic goal setting and really identifying your values and where you're trying to get to, having that be your definition of perfection, and it's going to keep changing as your farm business matures and grows over time. So we're going to spend just a few quick seconds to give you some context on lean. Henry Ford kind of like pioneered the concept. He didn't call it lean, but it's starting to get the manufacturing line going in the 1920s. Toyota was really the one that dialed it in, made all the lingo, got everything going in the 40s, and then it took off in the US in the 1980s. So there's a pretty strong support network and a pretty big trend for lean in the manufacturing world, but it's been applied across multiple sectors and for all the reasons that we just talked about, seems pretty applicable for helping, small farms, especially beginning farms, gain some competitive edge and become more viable and more sustainable in the long term. So, right, these are the distinguishing characteristics. We won't spend a lot of time on this, but looking at this kind of evolution from people being, really apprentice training, specialized in their skill, but doing the whole production from start to finish. A cobbler was making shoes from raw materials through the end, and it was one person doing it, switching to, as we all know, mass production factory line, one job, really low skill, people, getting bored out of their skulls. And lean, the distinguishing characteristic is folks getting cross-trained and having teams of workers that are kind of working together to problem solve. And we'll talk more about that as we go. It's a pretty critical piece. And not a foreign concept that, most farmers want to invest in their employees and cultivate them because it's one of the number one issues on farms. So same kind of deal, products, customized products, progress to standardized products with the focus on volume. This is production with a focus on precision dictated by customer needs or demands or wants. Same deal with the workplace. People were independent because they were working on one thing from start to finish, flexible equipment. We then went to an unskilled workforce for the most part, using single-use equipment, so not things that could be flexed to different levels or different types of jobs. No layers in the farm business, if anyone was at that workshop earlier today. But in lean, we're emphasizing, again, multi-skilled workers. Even if they are considered kind of a specialist on the farm, you could have your cultivation person. They tend to be really skilled in other areas as well. And right-sizing your equipment for the farm. Again, just to kind of get you in that mode of thinking, and I'll pick out the key point after I read it, but one of the most noteworthy accomplishments in keeping the price of forward products low is the gradual shortening of the production cycle. The longer an article is in the process of manufacture and the more it is moved about, the greater its ultimate cost. So really what this is saying is that the more a product moves, the more you move, and the more you touch things, the less efficient and therefore usually less profitable you're going to be. And the goal is to get those, we're going to talk about waste, but the goal is to get it so you have the minimal amount of process on your products before it gets to the customer. And having it be as smooth of flow, one-directional flow as possible. So first step in lean, one of the baseline concepts is 5S. So who's here, have you guys heard about this, more or less? Essentially, wait, let me try, you guys bear with me. I have a video that does a really good job explaining it. I don't know if it's going to work. So hold on one second. And then we can talk about it a little bit more. Looks like it may kind of work. If it doesn't work, we can just talk. And you have to have pretty dramatic sounding music in your ears because that's what's happening on the video, but you can't hear it because there's no sound. So basically, this company embarked on this mega 5S, which is not what I'm suggesting that you do, but I just want to watch the video to point out some of the key concepts from how they took a pretty cluttered, disorganized workplace and did a lot of different things with it. So I'll point out some of the major things. They basically, what they're saying right now is that they went from sheer chaos to now people can work safely and they know where things are, and they increased their throughput, I think, by 5-fold after they did this process. So they're like simultaneously doing the sorting step and the shining step right now, like sorting, getting everything that they don't have a use for out of there. It's cleaning and making it. You'll see like painting the floor, making these toolbox or toolboard things. That board, the visual board, was part of the standardization step. All right, so a pretty significant changeover. And like I said, they were able to measure actual improvement. But right, so yeah, real quick, sorting, again, anything that you don't have a use for. If you have you could make a question area, like people call it a red tag area, and kind of tuck it aside and see if you actually, touch it again. But generally, it's like don't store things just because you think you might use them one day, because generally that's not going to happen. Setting an order is like everything goes in its place, and then you're creating that regimen of like when you use it, you put it back in its place and keep that going. Shine, cleaning, painting, making tool boards with the outlines, things like that. So it's like really, really obvious where things should go, because obviously with a huge cluttered atmosphere, like it's really hard to just pick out and maintain your sorting and your setting in order if it just becomes this pile of junk over and over again. And sustaining is just, keep it going, make it part of the culture for both you and your employees. But really, if you are questioning whether you need to 5S your farm, if you can't find something, in like 30 seconds or less, or you can't like know where that thing is automatically, it's probably a good first step. The other tip, and we'll talk more about this in the second session, but don't try to do it piecemeal. So it doesn't work as well. Like they call that a mega 5S because they did the whole factory at once. But if you try to 5S, like whatever, just your shed, and there's nothing else around you that got organized, A, you won't have the space to actually like put things where you think they should go, and B, it's just not going to work. It's going to fall apart really fast. I worked with a few farms that tried to do it like, they'd set an hour aside once a week and try to 5S, and they got increasingly frustrated. And it wasn't even my idea for them to 5S it, so it's good. So here's an example, right?
That's an evening song, right?
What? Who said that?
I worked at Evening Song in 2013.
Okay, there you go. Well, I wasn't going to call farms out, but thank you for... yeah, they're good friends of mine, so I feel comfortable with this. But yes, they have amazing operation, but this is their weak point. And now that we're calling them out, they were one of the farms that tried to do it in small chunks, and it just wasn't happening. Another example, slightly better, but this is, this front part's the wash station, so it's pretty good. But this is, kind of a black hole of searching time waiting to happen. And this shed, is this 5S or not? Depends whose eyes you're looking through, right? So this is why I brought up that definition of perfection. This is actually post 5S, right? It's a dilapidated structure for this farmer. It's actually in really good order. So there's equipment storage back there. This is all waste that he needs to take to the landfill. These are, you can't tell, but there's tools hanging on either side. And this is the only area that could be improved, but this is Again, he needs to find a spot for actively used fluids. But other than that, like this shed, he was really, really proud of it. And he said that it was making a world of difference. So again, it's like what helps you and where is your perfection level? It doesn't have to be like out of control, anal retentive. It just needs to be set in order for your operation. So the shed is 5 I mean, we don't have a good picture of the outside, but the tools hanging on the wall. This stuff kind of tucked neatly out of the way. This gets cleaned up in season because this is their CSA pickup, right next to the U-pick fields, right next to the harvest field. So it's a good example of a centrally located structure that has a multi-use functionality. This is clearly like really nice and happy and it's good to go. The key is just getting your employees to put stuff back. So we're gonna, does anyone have any like questions up to this point? Cool. All right. So we're gonna move to thinking about waste now and spend quite a bit of the next little time period thinking about it. So a value-adding activity is any activity that increases the market form or function of the product or service. So anything that you're doing that's the customer is going to probably pay a little bit more for. So who might have an example of something, a value-added activity?
Washing your greens.
Yeah, exactly. Washing is a great example.
I was going to say bagging salad greens as opposed to having like a head of lettuce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If the customers value that. And if you do an experiment, it doesn't make a difference if they're bagging their own lettuce at the farmer's market, then that could be considered a wasteful activity. So the 3 that are generally considered the premier value-add activities on vegetable farms. Sorry, livestock people, this is pretty vegetable geared, but the concepts will be applicable across the board. But seeding, washing, and harvesting, value-adding activities. And your goal is to maximize the time you spend on these things. Not surprising. So non-value-added activities don't add any market form or function, or in the case of bagging salad greens, right, like it's not a necessary step, even though it could be perceived as a value-added step for some customer bases. So what's an example of a necessary activity that would still be considered a form of waste? Weeding. Exactly. Weeding's like probably the #1 thing that you have to do to get your product to market and improve your yields. But the customer's not giving you any extra money for doing a really good job weeding. Do you have one back there?
I was going to say bed management.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So all the field prep activities that you do.
Irrigation.
Yep, exactly. Great. And what?
Picking up rocks.
Yes. In fact, that might be like a different type of waste. Yeah. So he's got it. And it's also some of the paperwork stuff that you have to do. So, securing liability insurance is a good example. Or renewing your organic certification, like wanting to make those processes as streamlined as possible so you're not spending any more time than you have to on those activities. So unnecessary activities, possibly rock picking, possibly not, depending on how many rocks are in your field. Who has a completely unnecessary activity that you tend to engage in? Facebook. Yeah. So, right, harvesting seconds or like really damaged crops and bringing them up to the barn when you don't have, if you don't have a market for your juicing carrots, why are you moving those crops around? Another good example was, baling straw that you're just going to unbale and use as mulch. So instead of, harvesting onto a loose wagon and then throwing it off the wagon again, you've wasted quite a bit of time in that baling activity that didn't add any value to your crop. So our goal with type 2 is to completely eliminate the time you spend on those activities. Right, so here we go. We eliminate type 2 waste. You free up time, money, and capacity, both people capacity and equipment capacity and or, any type of resource capacity. So your land might increase in capacity. You spend time minimizing type 1 waste. Again, you're freeing up time, money, capacity. And with that extra time, money, capacity, you're working on maximizing value-adding activities, which could, so here's a good example. You find yourself hand-weeding head lettuce, the day before you're going to harvest it. Is that adding any value? No, but your bread looks awesome, so you might be really satisfied with that activity. But if you stop doing this, you have a chance to hoe the next succession of head lettuce when the weeds are really small, and you just fly through it. Crop is great, good to go. You might spend this extra time focusing on improving your wash and pack systems or your packaging for a new wholesale account. So anything that you can do, this is going to increase your sales, but really you didn't spend any extra resources to do that. You just stopped spending your resources on wasted activities that you're not going to get paid for. That make sense? All right. I threw a couple little random example slides. There's going to be also a lot more pictures in the second workshop, so hold tight. But this was an example. So this is in here because these are Velcroed onto the board. So this farmer's not spending time writing down his crop list and his prices every market. He's just ripping these things off. These are interchangeable. He does not have a lot of different prices. Tries to standardize, and then he's able to mix and match his crop list up there. These simple fixes can add up to a lot of time over the course of the season. And a lot of reduced errors, because you're not copying over a price list by hand. You just have to find the right signs and slap it up. This is a great example of minimizing the time you spend hauling things out of the field. So this is really, really low tech. Put your plastic or your weeds on a sled and pull it out of the field instead of making multiple trips with that stuff in your arms. So little things like that. It's also more ergonomic, but yeah, I think, and again, it's every little thing that you can possibly think of to get rid of those wasted type 2 waste activities. So a couple bigger concepts, and then we're going to dive into specific types of waste. So thinking about your capacity equals work is made up by your time working and your time wasting time. And so the more you can eliminate waste, the more this goes up to equal your capacity. And you can keep that number constant, right? But just have this work number be higher. This concept, again, of reducing your variable expenses. Even if your gross sales stay the same, you reduce your variable expenses by eliminating waste. And your contribution margin is going to be higher. So your contribution margin is what you have to pay your fixed expenses, which in this case, because we've only subtracted variable expenses, includes your owner's draw, it includes your capital reserve fund, as well as all your regular fixed expenses. So, important concept. This means if this is higher and your fixed expenses stay constant, your profit margin is going up. And then this is really from a holistic management perspective, but this is planning for profit. So instead of doing income minus expenses equals profit, you plan how much you actually need to make that season. Figure out how you're going to make those sales happen, and whatever's left over is your expenses. But the same concept applies, right? If these expenses are lower, it's going to be easier to hit your gross sales target. That make sense? Cool. I think those three different frameworks help. They're all a little bit different, but they all kind of help with how to think about implementing lean on your farm. So, ready to hear me be really geeky? So I learned this downtime acronym at one of my manufacturing trainings, but then there's two types of waste missing from it. And I figured out when I was putting this together, you can have OU downtime, right? Get it? Just pretend you get it. It's really good. I thought it was really applicable to the lean system, so I went with it. So we're going to walk through each of these 10 different types of waste, and then we're going to do a quick activity to try to get you thinking about these types of waste in existence on your farm. So overburdening. This is simply your workers, yourself, or your equipment are overtaxed. They're overstretched. You don't have enough time to get what you need done. You don't have enough time to do equipment maintenance, perhaps. It's the most common symptom of when you're in the growth stage of business, which, clearly it makes a lot of sense. So as we walk through, these little yellow arrows will be really fast, broad level suggestions of solutions, and we're going to dive deeper into those solutions that have been implemented on Vermont farms in the next session. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on this, but we'll look at it quickly. So overburdening, leveling the load, business planning, and looking at whether you can reduce your acreage and actually increase your yield and save wasted everything that way. So this is a good example of overburdening at a farm. These guys had just put up this high tunnel. They were new to growing in it, and they also were trying to wrap up their regular season business. They're 4 years into business, so they're new growers. Lack of communication meant these guys got frozen or frosted too early, so they lost their crop of high curries. I forget what this was, but similar thing happened over here, just wiped out the bed. It's just the lack of the system to keep things going. But one thing that was really cool that they had implemented in here was, so you see these row covers? They were saving themselves work time by pulling them over the wires with these little clips. So really, really low cost kind of way to cover their beds really quickly, one off. And they were really happy with the way that it was working. They just had to remember to actually do it. Uneven productions and sales. This is up and down with both production level and your sales. You're creating inefficiency plus cash flow stresses. So it's kind of a double whammy. A lot of farms are clearly working on leveling the load, going to year-round production. The high tunnel system. I liked this example. Farmer was growing peas up the side, but was doing a really nice job getting crops of radishes and herbs along the edge before the peas got big, and had this row weed mat down, so he was not wasting motion when he was having to take care of his high tunnel. This is another little. I just like this system. So this is kind of a way to level the load again, but it's just using the side of your high tunnel and pretty much extending it by pulling the plastic over these hardening off units. And it was a pretty slick. This is the same thing over here. You just can't see it as well. This is actually like to the edge, so it captures the heat a little better than this system. But super low tech way to not tie up your growing space inside, or being able to keep half of it tables and then in-ground crop on the other side, because you have this hardening off area out there. So defective products, we're starting downtime now. So second, unsellable crops. You can't avoid these things necessarily. What you can avoid is taking them into the barn again if you don't have a market for them. Doing things like reseeding if you have really spotty germination, because then you're not spending the same amount of time cultivating a bed to get, whatever, a quarter of the crop off of it. So just making those decisions really quickly. Oops. Oh, technology. To either reseed, give up on a bed because you are going to spend most of your labor cost harvesting, washing, and packing. And then, keeping good records to evaluate at the end of the season whether you should actually have that crop in your system if you keep having defective products in that one crop over and over again. So brassica, I don't know if you guys have Swede midge here, but so many Vermont growers have given up growing broccoli in large quantities because of the Swede midge. Just, they're down to some years 90% loss. And so it's not worth it. Overproduction is a huge source of waste on farms. I don't think anyone's surprised by that. So, uneven, not having your crop plan work out perfectly, but essentially, you're creating yourself a push selling situation for yourself if you harvest it all, because you've overproduced based on what you projected your customers demanding. And it is hard to avoid when you are beginning farm, because you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you have a wholesale account but you don't have the crop for it, because that's going to hinder your farm growth. So there's a fine line to walk with these things. But working on record keeping, especially your yields and your harvest quantities and your timing, and really working to develop pull marketing instead of push marketing will help kind of dial in overproduction as your business matures. This is a good example of a harvest sheet that is really quick and easy for folks to fill out. We're not going to spend a lot of time looking at this, but 2 copies, so the harvest crew can have one out in the field. The pack and wash copy is what actually gets input into the computer. But all that happens is that the farmer fills in, accounts across the top. They're not retyping all their different crops here. They're permanently set up. They are writing what they need to harvest. The crew simply puts a slash through it when it's harvested. And if it's different, they adjust with the numbers here. And then that info gets input into the computer. So I just want, again, we're not going to have time to go in depth on record keeping, but one example of an effective, efficient system to capture that data. Weighting. I don't know if you guys have the experience of sitting there watching your crew and kind of ticking up the dollars as they stand around, or they're looking for a tool, or it's whatever, they have 10 minutes left in their day and they just essentially waste it, and you're like, okay, well that just cost me $50. So developing systems that people can constantly reference. The easiest one that I've seen is having a centrally located board that includes kind of a 15-minute list. So if it's thundering, but most likely if crew is just done with something, they can check this list. And these things are kind of always what needs to happen. A lot of these are 5S related. And so they have this reference point. And so they're using that time period effectively, and not creating waiting waste. Again, this is a really good example of nothing too high tech, but the hoses are not going to fall out of the tub while they're filling up, because the water's coming in and down. So folks can turn the water on, walk away, do something else, come back, shut the water off, the tub's full. They don't have to sit there holding the hose, waiting for it to fill up. Okay, second U, unused talent. So wasting people, essentially. Again, we're not in that mass production system, so really focusing in on what kind of potential exists in your employees that you're not using, or they feel is not being used. And kind of the lean mantra is, have your employees be doing the work, but always actively thinking about how they can improve the work. And you probably won't use their suggestions 9 times out of 10, but it can be a really good way to get improvements generated. Almost done with this. I'm going to stop and you guys will think for a second. Transportation waste, so self-explanatory, unnecessary or really inefficient transportation of products. Many times because you're moving something, that's going to go hand in hand with motion waste, so they're pretty intertwined. So to address this, working on your farm layout, your field layout, setting delivery minimums, working on your production planning and your harvest systems. There's 2 kind of nice setups that folks have implemented to improve or to minimize transportation waste. So this cart goes over this farm's bed exactly, the width, and they can fill it up with 4 totes in a row, and then they're just pulling it out of the field. They're very small scale, less than an acre in production, really intensively farmed. They don't have the luxury of driving their truck all over the farm, so this has saved them a lot of time. This thing, very similar. If you have this farm had a small quantity or didn't have a truck available, they're able to load a fair amount of product on there, get it back to the wash station quickly. As inventory, we talked a lot about this with 5S, but getting away from that just in case mentality that really is like pack rat drives this, like, we have to keep this because we might need it someday. So 5S'ing, again, avoiding overharvesting, and working on leveling the load. Motion waste is, again, motion and overprocessing, I think, are the two biggest forms of waste on farm systems. So similar, we're back on this, like, waste, the value stream, value-adding activities. Anything that does not add value to the product or service is motion waste. And we're going to spend, I think this is like, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about product flow, both Taylor and I, the next session. But doing all these different things to really, really work on motion waste, because labor, you know, it's addressing your biggest cost center, which is labor, and your own backs and your own time and your own quality of life. So it's a big one. This was a cool, I thought, a really cool setup. So similar to, like, carrying totes out of the field, these are designed to carry this farmer's greenhouse starts out of the greenhouse. He also, when these are beds right here, when he plants, he just flips these over, and they're his hoops for his row cover. So a good way to multi-purpose, you know, layered farm enterprises using the same really cheap piece of equipment or supplies. You know, motion waste, this is, I don't know, probably a lot of you have this, but hanging up your hoses in the wash station and in the greenhouses saves a lot of time and potential crop damage. And this is a flat filler, and with a whatever rolly thing, so that they're not having to pick up every single tray over and over again. They can just send them down the line, move them a short distance, and not worrying about carrying a lot of weight. Last one, extra processing or over processing. We talked about this previously, but again, doing anything that does not add value from the customer's point of view is considered over processing. So really working on getting to know your customers, training your employees so that they're not having these ideas in their head about what they should be doing to get a crop to market, and your marketing plan. That's tailored to each of your different marketing channels to minimize the amount of processing you do for each of those customers. So if everyone has paper, I thought it might be nice for A, me to stop talking for a second, but B, I want to put the 10 types of waste up on the board. If you want to spend, like, what time is it, like 5 minutes or so or less, just working on identifying quickly where an example of each of the types of waste on your farm. All right, so do you folks does anyone feel like throwing out some examples? You can go popcorn style, see what folks came up with. We can work down the list. What about, okay, let's just start with what is it, overburdening? Yeah.
We process chickens the same day that we have farm store, and it ends up being ridiculous because people come to the farm and we're like frantically trying to make it so it doesn't look like slaughter.
Yeah. Yeah, so thinking about, like, why your system is set up that way and getting to that. What about you, the uneven production? No one has that problem? Yeah.
I ran into this problem for the first time this year. The first couple of years I was farming, I was living with my parents. And now that I'm living on my own and really have to have the farm income support myself as well as the firm, having the money to do the seed order early enough before, like, varieties I want start selling out is an issue. Yeah. It's like, I need to have this money, but I don't have a product to sell and have this money.
Yeah, that's a good one. It's a pretty common one. Defective products.
Any mushrooms that we can't sell, to dry them and repurpose them and sell them as a different product, you know, stocks or maybe chicken feed if we need to for other farmers.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing. We use a lot of our defective products to make pickles or like kimchi, but I don't know if this one falls under promotion, but like taking the super large zucchinis that we missed and bringing them to the chickens and the pigs takes 30 minutes out of the day bringing unused product up there.
Yeah, and you think it actually helps substitute any of the grain that they need, or like, it's like one of those people like, oh, this makes me feel really good, probably, to give them
Yeah.
some extra produce. But right, that's a good one. Yeah, and a lot of these will fall under both. Like I think that is both defective products and motion waste. What about overproduction?
That has to do with, well, for us, it would be, we've gotten rid of one of our products that we tended to overproduce, which was flowers. But we do also have mushrooms, and we imagine the drying. I think Cornell is doing a value added, a special for small farms on mushrooms. But anyway, that's another story.
We'll talk.
Yes. And also, we see, last year we had a bumper crop of blueberries and we didn't have enough pickers. So we realized there was a backup place we could go to next year if it happens, or the next time. There's a place that has volunteers that come in, will pay you a certain amount, not as much. They'll sell you product locally, this is in Troy, and give you something back for it. And the volunteers will pick it for you.
That
So it
sounds
was
good,
very,
yeah.
it was a cool idea. There are often solutions to these that are
Right.
surprising.
Yep. Yeah, or even like if you overproduce and harvest those blueberries, can you freeze them and sell them for more money in the off season? Things like that would be great. Here, let's pick into. What about weighting waste? It's a little trickier one to pinpoint. Yeah.
When we have a spot where we have to put a crop in, but we don't know exactly how much crop, but the employees are standing there waiting, how much seed do we put in or what variety, and we have to like go have a side conversation about what should go in that bed while they're standing there.
Yeah, that's a great one. I remember doing that often. Let's see. We'll just skip around. We'll skip down to, what about inventory waste? Does anyone have that problem? Yeah, in the back.
Yeah, I kept my seats in the walk-in cooler, and the box wasn't all tight, and they got damp.
Yeah. Right, yeah, very real thing, real issue. And then let's do one more. Let's do motion waste. Kind of the all-encompassing one. Who has a good example for that? If they wouldn't mind sharing. Yeah.
Last year we didn't have the prowler and the tractor to move crates from here and there, and most people were carrying one crate super far to the wash shed and then way back to the field and then wheeled it out by that time, and that was a bad one.
Yeah.
Now we have the prowler, so we can load that up.
Nice. Yeah. Yes. And that's a pretty common limiting factor on, especially those small acreage, like how you can move your product effectively and efficiently without getting some like really too big of a truck, or too much, or your truck's out on deliveries and you have to figure out a harvesting system. So with that in mind, right, you have these kind of these issues that you've addressed based on like doing a quick waste assessment on your farm. So, you know, you might think about, we'll talk through an example, but like, do you know what the root cause of that is? Like that at the core, what is generating that problem? It may or may not be the first thing that you think about. So thinking about, you know, and it might be, but like generally when a farm calls me up and is like, hey, can you come, whatever, take a look at our wash pack situation, our volunteers are screwing stuff up, we get to like, oh, actually their product flow might be perfect, but it's like the communication issues, and like they don't have pictures up for, you know, what things should look like, or standard pack sizes, like really, so the volunteers or their worker members who aren't going to be as well trained can just follow those instructions. So things like that can be at the root of what you need to address, and then it trickles down to the actual manifesting problem. So one example, and then we're going to talk through some of yours. I was working with this value-added, well, they're a dairy farm, they also do value-added products. They call me up and they're like, hey, our value-added team is completely inefficient. They're screwing up our profitability. They're messing, like, that's the reason why we haven't been able to hit our sales target and our net income targets. So we get there, and we spent a lot of time, like, looking at the plant, spent a lot of time talking to those employees, and then the management team in addition. There was really no evidence of, like, inefficient anything in that value-added plant team. So what we started to do was map out, we're getting a little bit in depth here, but this is a value stream type of value stream mapping. But we mapped out all the different inputs and parts of their process, and then had a team meeting about these yellow sticky notes, identify the major issues that are happening at each of these points and things that we needed to work on. Really what it boiled down to is that their milk cost of production was too high and that they have way too many people working in the barn. And so it was presented as the value-added team is limiting our sales and our income potential, but it really was way back in the input stage of their process. So we kind of made we went from this to working on areas of improvement and identifying the major ones. So the ones that are circled are the ones that had multiple votes. And then we assigned key members of that team to work on these problems, because these are generally the point people that have decision-making power or that know the process really, really well to try to attack their problems. So I thought we might be worthwhile just trying that really, really quickly. If you guys want to pair off, I think would be the best way to do it based on this room setup. But spend 5 minutes, pick one of your problems that you identified on that stream, and try to help the people sitting next to you, ask questions that are going to say, what's the root cause of your problem? We could try that. I think that you could use, there's the 5 whys. You could just keep asking why over and over again, like why something is happening. But I think generally a more robust assessment addressing the people, product, and resource base can get you to the root cause quicker. So I'd be interested to hear if anyone had a conversation and that was a really, really, really truncated assessment time. But if anyone was able to get somewhere that even started them down the path of being surprised at where the question line was heading them. Did someone just say yes? Who said yes? Okay. Would you mind sharing what you...
Sure. Yeah. So my husband loves to work with used equipment, and inevitably he's also not on the farm full time. So he's also the guy that, that's his job. And so inevitably my crew and I are around and something's not functioning, and so there's a lot of waiting for him to get back to fix something. Mm-hmm. So a couple things we talked about were, one, having this a much more regular maintenance schedule and checklist for the employees to be constantly looking at things, so that to do a little more proactive work rather than reactive work on the equipment, and that making sure that communication chain is open and constantly flowing. And
yeah, that's great. Maybe one or two other people want to offer anything up? Yeah.
We were having a conversation, I think a lot of farms have, with the increased cost of labor, whether being driven by upping minimum wage, or you just have to pay more to get people and keep them. With that, and then kind of the inability to pass out on prices, there's this other factor coming at you of, we want lower prices to make this more available to everybody, but our costs are going up.
Right.
And guess who's getting squeezed in the middle?
Yeah, that's a common thing. So and then the lean thinking would take you down the path of how can you do more with that same amount of labor to bump up sales, even if you can't charge more for that product. All right, how about one more?
I've always wondered just...
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I've wondered if you put farm workers on salary, if that would make a difference. Instead of worrying about that 10 minutes that they're not working, if they were on salary, then they'd be able to walk off, and maybe it would be an incentive for people to work faster. I always think it's kind of weird when people ask. It's just an idea.
In New York State, salary is $39,000 though. I don't think most of us are going to pay someone $39,000.
Yeah, so I've heard salary working for manager type folks, but yeah, it's an interesting thought for a crew. I don't know. How about one more surprise, and then we'll sum it up and have a few minutes for questions. No. Then we should get point with the laser here to call someone out. All right, we can keep going. So we'll just spend the next few minutes kind of summing up, getting some kind of key highlights that we both touched on that kind of are the next step, like kind of I don't know, extra little tips, I guess, that we don't have time to really dive into. So we're just revisiting this cycle of the waste elimination. So continuous improvement, like always, again, it's like that standardized, like integrated into your system. And once you have this freed up and you're maximizing value activities, you're then able to go back and continue to eliminate this like completely unnecessary waste. You're able to go back and completely eliminate type 1 waste. Like just, it always cycles back, and the more you free up, the more obvious the waste is in your system. Ideally, that's what happens. And then the more time you have for value-add activities, which can both increase your sales and reduce your expenses simultaneously. One kind of important piece of this, which is tricky because it's hard to figure out what to track and how to do that effectively throughout the whole season, but thinking about, like, again, how you define perfection or success and what metrics might tell you that you're starting to get there, whether it's like, you know, dollars per hour of delivery or, you know, number of customers that come through your farm stand, like anything that's like you can figure out an easy way to track, but that will help you see that you actually are spending more time on your value-adding activities. So a few other like summary statements before we can have a few minutes for questions. Again, usually it's starting with 5S to really be able to see your farm in its entirety. How are you going to do more with those existing resources? One other really important concept is that you want to go into like a lean assessment of your farm with it is the processes that are the problem, not your people. It's not you, it's not your farm partner, it's not your employees being lazy. It's generally something that the system is faulty and it's not allowing people to get to their full potential. It's a really helpful, and it also is helpful for like employee buy-in because they're not like, oh, you're trying to root out the inefficient one of us. This is all like a manhunt and we're going to lose our jobs. But generally, if you free up time, you can, same to his point, you can do more with those people and increase your sales that way. Have your employees helping in that process is also a critical piece. I forget who said this to me, but like a really important kind of mentality to approach this with is you come up with all these different brainstorm solutions. Like maybe you're saying like, I want to put my crew on salary. Your initial reaction or your farm partner's initial reaction might be, we can't do that, like done. Like that doesn't happen. Instead, kind of explore all the different potential solutions by saying like, if we were to make this happen, we would have this, this, and this that would also need to happen. It's a different kind of, it's really subtle, but it allows those creative processes to come through and identify solutions. So in terms of efficiency, we didn't talk about this much, but like kind of the batch mentality of like, you know, pick a bunch of high curries, put them down in a pile, pick them up, put the rubber band on, put them in the bin, is a lot slower than continuous flow. So holding on to putting as much value onto a crop that once you pick it up before you put it back down is going to allow you to gain a lot of efficiency. You can like test it by doing like time trials with like stuffing envelopes, either by piece or by doing it from start to finish. It's pretty interesting because it's counterintuitive. Push versus pull marketing. So again, like working on structuring your production system so you can actively respond to customer needs. Same point, so this was brought up, scheduled maintenance tasks, both leveling the load and preserving your system function. And we talked about that. So again, setting measurable goals for yourself. So final summary points. If you're looking at going ahead and trying to go out and do this on your farm, starting with low-hanging fruit, like the changes that could be made that you might actually notice the difference of within, you know, work on it for a couple months, and then you say, oh, hey, I see this change, or the effect of this change. And it'll both give you momentum, and it also just encouragement, because you can actively identify that those things are working, as opposed to setting like this huge goal of whatever, I'm gonna, I don't know, increase my sales by $100,000 next season, that you can't actively see your progress working towards, and it's not achievable. So this concept of when you are changing something in your production system, think through your whole value chain and who is it going to impact and what problems might occur. So related to that idea of if this is going to happen, I need to do this, but kind of the reverse. So creating contingency plans and really trying to dive in. Is it going to affect your customers, your employees, your whatever feed dealer, anything that you have to kind of get ahead of so that you're not creating more waste for yourself as you implement this change. And finally, like making sure your change actually addresses your core problem and is not just what you think is going to help, or treating that surface issue and not the root cause. So that's lean really, really fast, the basics of lean really fast. We do have like 5 minutes if folks have questions that they want to throw out there or things to talk about. Yeah.
How do you assess marketing and your value added? Because it seems like, you know, a lot of being a small farmer is the relationship.
Yeah.
So how do you assess that as far as value added activity?
How do you, assess whether whether like a marketing activity is a value added
Yes.
activity. So generally, it's a type 1 form of waste. So it's something that you would want to minimize. Like you have to be out there marketing, but like the actual act of marketing is getting your customers to buy something. It's not adding value to that particular product. Does that make sense? Like by like putting up a website, you're not making your carrots more valuable or your like goat milk caramel more valuable.
I guess I think people are willing to pay more for a product if they feel like they know how it was produced.
Yeah.
And,
Okay.
used it.
Right, and if they have a like that type of
And if
marketing.
they feel like they know you.
Yeah.
Like I think they're willing to pay a premium for that.
Yeah.
Traceability.
So how would you assess like what is I would still say minimize it. Like as much as you need to do, but if you tweak your label and your logo and then you spend an extra 3 hours on social media, if you can track your sales, if you can somehow figure out like a rough ROI on your efforts and nothing changes because you spent an extra 3 hours telling your story on social media, drop it back down, because then you're into type 2 waste instead of type 1 waste. It's not easy though. Marketing is the trickiest part. Yeah.
When we did that, one of the exercises, in terms of looking at the core problems, root causes, there was the 5 whys, and then what was the other thing you said to, like, people and...
Yeah, looking at your major buckets of like, you can call them like just people, products, and your resource base. You can also split it up as resources, production, and marketing, like depending on how your brain likes to work. Cool. Awesome. Well, if there's no other questions, thanks for coming and listening and participating. And the next, just to give you a sense of like what's going to be different next time, we're going to be just not really diving into lean concepts so much as spending time looking at how farms in Vermont have applied and found solutions for different forms of, or applied lean on their farms successfully. So a lot of photos, and then Taylor's going to spend a large chunk of time really diving into how they've applied lean on their farm.